The sun cleared the ridge of the Judean hills, pulling long, thin shadows across the stone courtyard. Activity defined the morning. In the distant rows of the vineyard, the older son moved with precise, rhythmic motions, pruning the vines. Near the heavy wooden gate, the younger son stood motionless, his eyes locked on the horizon, ignoring the work of the day. The estate breathed with the order of generations. Then the rhythm broke. The younger son turned away from the road and walked toward the veranda where his father stood. He did not wait for a greeting. He stopped within arm's reach and spoke. "Father, give me my share of the estate now." The air in the courtyard seemed to thin. The older son paused in the field. His shears held mid-air, sensing a shift in the wind. The father remained perfectly still. He did not blink, nor did he pull back. He let the silence stretch, forcing the weight of the request to settle between them. The peace of the morning had vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp divide. The younger son held his ground, waiting for the refusal that did not come. The father turned, walked to the heavy ledger, and signed the papers. He did not look for an argument or an explanation. He simply divided the land, the livestock, and the silver, handing it all over with a heavy hand. The older son watched from the edge of the vineyard, his jaw set, his hands gripping the pruning shears until his knuckles turned white. He did not move to intervene. Days later, the younger son began to pack. He moved through his quarters, clearing the shelves, folding his belongings into a single bundle. He stopped at the threshold of his room, looking at the empty space he was leaving behind. Outside, the morning heat was already rising. He walked to the gate, the wood groaning as he pushed it open. He hesitated, his hand lingering on the latch, and looked back one final time. The courtyard was silent. His father stood on the veranda, a motionless silhouette against the bright stone wall. The son turned, stepped onto the dusty path, and began to walk. He did not wave. He did not call out. He kept walking until his figure dwindled into a small speck, eventually vanishing past the ancient olive tree at the bend of the road. The father remained on the veranda, his eyes fixed on the horizon, watching the empty space where his son had been. The city swallowed him whole. It was a place of noise, stone, and endless movement, a sharp contrast to the slow pace of the Judean hills. He moved through the bustling markets, his hands heavy with the weight of coins. With every step, he felt the change. He walked into the taverns, and, his purse open and inviting, men he had never met crowded around him, their laughter loud and their promises endless. He bought the finest wine and ordered plates piled high with roasted meats. He sat at rich tables, surrounded by faces that smiled only when his coin hit the wood. The days blurred into nights. He threw feasts that lasted until the torches flickered out. He traded his inheritance for influence and his status for temporary joy. He was no longer a son waiting for a harvest. He was a master of his own pleasure. He surrounded himself with voices that echoed his own. Ignoring the way his pouch felt lighter with every passing sunset, he did not look for the road back. He looked only for the next celebration, the next toast, and the next stranger to call a friend. The city offered him everything, and he took it all, unaware that the coins were already nearing their end. The rhythm of the city changed without warning. The laughter at the tables turned brittle. One night, the wine stopped flowing. The next, the companions he had toasted so generously were nowhere to be found. He reached into his pouch and pulled out nothing but dust. Then, the sky turned a bruised, permanent gray. The drought descended like a physical weight. The wells in the public squares ran dry, the water replaced by cracked clay, and the smell of stagnant silt. Market stalls that once overflowed with goods boarded up, their owners vanishing into the shadows of the alleys. The wind began to scour the streets, carrying stinging grit that coated everything in a layer of gray ash. The sun walked the marketplace, his hands empty, looking for a familiar face. But the city had turned its back on him. He approached the merchants who had once bowed to him, but they slammed their shutters shut as he neared. There was no work to be found, no grain to harvest, no coins to earn. He stood in the center of the square as the final street lantern flickered out, leaving him in the cold, hollow silence of a city that had nothing left to give him. He left the city walls behind, walking until the stench of the troughs reached him before the field did. He took the only work offered, tending to the pigs. He knelt in the mire, his hands sinking into the cold, wet earth. The animals grunted and shoved, their snouts deep in the troughs filled with carob pods. The smell of the feed was sharp and sweet. His stomach knotted, a visceral, twisting pain that left him gasping. He reached out, fingers brushing the edge of the trough, but a worker shoved him aside with a heavy boot. He fell back into the mud. He sat there, shivering, watching the pigs eat their fill. In that silence, the memory of his father's estate returned. He saw the table of the servants, the bread piled high, the steady warmth of a home that never lacked. He counted the days since he had last been full. He realized the chasm between his pride and the reality of the dirt beneath him. He stood up, wiping the mud from his arms, and cleared his throat. He whispered the words to the wind. I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. He looked toward the horizon. At dawn, he would begin the walk home. The sun hung low, casting long, amber fingers across the Judean hills. On the veranda, the father stood motionless, his eyes tethered to the winding path that disappeared into the valley. He had watched that road for months, his gaze softening only when the shadows stretched to their limit. Then a speck emerged from the haze of the horizon. He squinted, his breath catching as the figure drew nearer. The gait was uneven, the shoulders slumped, but the stride belonged to a memory he had never let go. The father did not wait for the son to reach the gate. He stepped off the stone terrace, his feet finding the uneven earth of the field. He began to walk, then quickened his pace, then broke into a run. His stride was heavy, his pace unpracticed, yet he did not stumble. He ignored the thorns that snagged his stride and the dust that rose to meet his lungs. He was a man possessed by a single, driving intent. He closed the distance with desperate speed, his arms outstretched, long before he reached the boy. He collided with the thin, ragged figure, wrapping his arms around him, pulling him away from the path and into the safety of his hold. He buried his face against the son's shoulder, ignoring the grime and the scent of the road, pressing him close as if to anchor him to the earth. The son pulled back slightly, his voice cracking as he began the speech he had practiced for miles. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. He started to add the request to be a servant, but the father gripped his shoulders and silenced him with a sharp shake of his head. He did not let the boy finish. He turned toward the estate, his voice booming across the courtyard, cutting through the dust. Bring the best robe. Bring a ring for his hand and sandals for his feet. The servants dropped their tools, startled, then surged forward at the urgency in his tone. They moved with frantic precision. They draped the heavy, soft fabric over the boy's shoulders, obscuring the grime of the journey. One servant knelt, sliding the gold signet ring onto the boy's trembling right hand. The weight of the metal felt cold and heavy against his skin. The father held him firm, his gaze sweeping over the staff as he declared, My son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. The boy stood still, the fabric of the new robe settling against his frame, the reality of his place restored before he could even ask for mercy. The heavy oak doors of the house swung open, and the silence that had gripped the estate for so long shattered. Inside, the lamps were lit, turning the dim rooms into pools of warm, flickering gold. Servants moved with newfound purpose, carrying platters of food that steamed in the cool night air. The sound began as a tentative note from a single lyre, then expanded into a cascade of melodies as a flute joined the rhythm. It was a sound of unrestrained life. People from the neighboring lands poured into the courtyard, their voices rising in laughter and song, filling every corner of the property. The son sat at the head of the long table, the weight of the gold ring catching the light with every gesture. He looked around at the faces of guests who had only known his absence. The father moved among the crowd, his face illuminated by the glow of the hearth, his hands resting on the shoulders of those who arrived to share in the joy. The house, once a place of waiting and shadows, now throbbed with the heartbeat of a community reunited. Every corner resonated with the music, and the air itself felt heavy with the scent of roasted grain and the sharp, bright notes of celebration. The older son walked up the path, the dust of the vineyards still clinging to his boots. He expected the usual quiet of the evening. Instead, a wall of sound hit him, the rhythmic strumming of a lyre and the high, piercing notes of a flute. He stopped, his brow furrowing as he scanned the courtyard. It was not a gathering of neighbors for a harvest. It was a feast. He caught a servant by the arm, the man's face flushed with the exertion of carrying heavy platters. "What is this?" the son demanded. The servant glanced toward the house, his eyes wide. "Your brother has returned. Your father has ordered the fattened calf killed." The older son's hand dropped. The information landed like a physical blow. He stood motionless as the music swirled around him, mocking the years of labor he had poured into the soil. The joy inside was a language he did not speak. He felt the heat of the house pushing against the cool night air, but he did not move toward it. He planted his heels in the dirt, his jaw set, and turned his back on the open door. The celebration continued, indifferent to the man standing in the shadows, his heart hardening against the sound of his father's laughter. The music muffled as the father stepped through the threshold, his gaze sweeping the darkened courtyard until he found the silhouette near the gate. He walked forward, his pace steady, closing the distance between the revelry and the resentment. "I have served you for years," the older son said, his voice hard, cutting through the distant sound of the flute. "I never received even a goat for my friends, yet you kill a fattened calf for him." The father stopped inches away, his expression unclouded by anger, his posture open. "Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. But we had to celebrate, for this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." The father's hand hovered briefly, then dropped to his side. He offered no further argument, only a steady, patient gaze that invited the son back into the light. The older son stood paralyzed at the intersection of his own bitterness and the warmth radiating from the open door. The light from the house spilled out, casting his shadow long across the dirt. He stared into the glow, his feet unmoving. The decision hung in the cold air, a single step separating the isolation of the dark from the mercy waiting inside.